ZeroNow program is brought to you with the support of our founding partners.
And now I'm very excited to introduce our guest panelists today. We actually have a very special guest. Dennis Ryan is stepping in today to join in. Dennis is from North Penn School District. Dennis, would you mind just providing your background and connection to the topic we're talking about today?
Yeah, sure. Good afternoon, everybody. It's great to see everybody. My name is Dennis Ryan, the coordinator of transportation with North Penn School District in Lansdale, Montgomery County, just outside Philadelphia, suburban area. We oversee transportation for about 145 bus routes, transport about 13,000 students. Been in the industry since 2009. Long dedicated to this industry, and providing safe transportation to all students. So glad to be a part of it. Thank you, Ara.
And glad that you're back joining us again. I know and this is such a hot topic. I mean, we have over 200 folks registered, ready to learn more about this because this is an emerging topic. So we're glad that you could join us again.
Absolutely.
Okay. Joe Redmond. So Joe Redmond is the Senior Manager of Security at First Student. Joe, would you mind just please introducing yourself, sir?
Absolutely. And thank you, R, and thank you, ZeroNow, for bringing us together here for this important conversation. By way of introduction, as R said, my name is Joe Redmond. I'm the Senior Manager of Security at First Student, where I've had the opportunity to lead security programs across North America. That path has kind of been shaped over 3 decades of service and leadership, starting out in the Marine Corps, transitioning into the criminal justice world, where I was fortunate enough to experience all 3 areas, corrections, law enforcement, and rehabilitation, and moving into the corporate role at First Student, where we have 46,000 buses, transport 5.5 million students journeys a day. So we really get a broad overview of risk, security risk that we learn from, and try to be responsive and not reactive in the way we approach that. So that's the lens I bring to the discussion today, and I'm looking forward to it.
Awesome. Thank you, Joe. Glad you're part of the conversation. And Mr. Chris Weedin. Chris is the School Safety Operations and Coordination, works at the Operations Center in South Central Washington State. So Chris, welcome.
Hey, thank you so much. Awesome to be here. Looking forward to this collaboration and hearing what's going on in everybody else's world out there. Our slice of the world is, as Ara said, South Central Washington State, and it is a busy, busy place. So our School Safety Operations Center, the SSOCC, we service over 25 districts, roughly 60,000 students or so. And we have provided services to them now for over 10 years. And we train and provide assessments and leading practice and assistance resources in all facets of school safety. Everything from gangs and drugs to social, emotional, mental, behavioral issues, all of that, anything that comes under the purview of school safety. And as has been mentioned, transportation safety has been really in the forefront and should be. It has been long overlooked. And I think it's exciting in our region. We've done training on that for drivers, dispatchers, transportation directors, and been lobbying for years for just this sort of engagement. So I'm excited to be a part of this.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris. So are we. And as the participants, we'd like for you to introduce yourselves as well in the chat. Just if you wouldn't mind sharing who you are, what organization you're with. If you have questions for our panelists, just hit the Q&A button. I know there's a chat, but there's also Q&A. Just hit the Q&A button, and we'll get to that during the program. So just to get started here, Joe, I know you work with a lot of schools around the nation. What trends are you seeing as far as challenges that drivers are experiencing today? Like what are the biggest trends that you're seeing?
Yeah, so from our seat, we kind of pay attention to not just what's happening to First Student, but we have alerts set up that we get notified of issues that pertain to any school or any school bus related activity around the nation and Canada. And right now, to rank it, it's theft and violence. To be frank, they kind of battle back and forth for the top two. And when I say violence, don't think the worst case scenario. Yes, those scenarios are out there, but it's the heated arguments that our bus drivers may come in contact with. It stops with aggravated or upset parents, behaviors on the bus, things of that nature. Plus just the world in general, and the things we're seeing. Like Chris said, the mental health side has seen an increase in activity, and that plays a large part in both.
Chris, I mean, what are you seeing? Anything different from your experience in the Pacific Northwest?
Well, we don't generally have any problems or challenges up here. It's so
So you
peaceful, and
figured.
the mountains and the forests and the water. So really, everything's pretty much a paradise up here. I'd say the two things really, the number one would be threats, increasing threats. We see just a lot of this kids in the back of the bus and they get in conflict with somebody else, and it's, I'm going to bring my dad's gun and shoot you. And a lot of that back and forth with students, right? The bullying and those sorts of things, but definitely an escalation in that. We have a member of our team who is a threat assessment specialist, and that's where a lot of his work comes in. Is we had students on the back of the bus, it's reported to the driver, thank you, Lord, in most cases, right? Or the driver overhears, or somehow word gets back that these threats, we've even had threats against our drivers too, and from students primarily in that regard too. So I'd say a lot of it, that's the trend that we're seeing issue-wise, and maybe related to that, one of the requests that we get from drivers specifically is, how do we interact with kids? How do we deal with them? How do we build relationships? How do we prevent these things from happening? How do we de-escalate these situations? Like Joe mentioned, some of those intense, those anger issues and those challenges that come up with students on the bus, and the days when, when I was a kid and the driver just turned around and said, sit down and shut up, right? That was my experience, right? And but the world is different, and they really are requesting those skills. And I love that they're bold enough to step forward and say, now, hey, we need to know how to handle this.
Yeah, Chris, I think my bus driver had a cigarette in her mouth when she said, sit down, shut up. This was in the late 70s, so yeah. I mean, Dennis, I mean, are drivers trained in de-escalation and interaction? One of our ZeroNow Advisory Council members, Chief Dan Dussault, used the term pre-escalation. So how do you even get to the point before you have to de-escalate? But what kind of training do you offer bus drivers in North Penn?
So we are implementing kind of on an annual basis here, utilizing the resources we have within our own district, to have like board certified behavioral analysts, sit down with our bus drivers and go over de-escalation techniques on the bus and how to properly manage that. Because I think in the past, quite honestly, there wasn't really much training for that. It was more or less like, okay, try to do the best you can managing your behavior. Don't be too assertive. Don't be too shy. Try to be in between that. But, there's very specific circumstances that happen these days that drivers, they want to know what to do in those said situations. So, we're utilizing our resources to help them in those situations. Whether it's, through our own resources, or we're using outside resources like Alice training, for example, on how to, deal with certain situations, or, other vendors that provide that type of training. So I think in this day and age, providing the drivers the education they need in order to do the right thing in the said situation, I think that's paramount, to avoid, something happening.
Exactly. And Joe, I mean, you manage security on a national basis. I mean, what type of training do you provide as far as, behavioral related things, de-escalation, dealing with situations or challenges that you might expect in a bus situation?
Yeah, so First Student has a very renowned first service program that addresses those behavioral issues that we want to talk about or we want to prepare drivers for. From the security department's point of view, though, is I like that word you used before, are the pre-escalation. And that's really how we address it. We want to prepare our drivers for those encounters. We want to make it happen and what could happen and give them the opportunities to be situationally aware, prepared, not paranoid, right? We don't want them driving around thinking the worst is going to happen, but we want them to understand, hey, these are the contingencies that are out there and what I need to look for, and then reporting those as soon as possible so the appropriate resources can come help what we consider the largest remote workforce out there. We talked a little bit about it yesterday on the pre-call. The drivers are by themselves. That they're not in a school where there's other teachers, principals, staff that can come to their assistance. They're dependent on themselves, the radio to ask for help from dispatch and to get that guidance, things of that nature. So we try to prepare them through that training, communication, repetition platform. But the other side of it is, you have to look at your drivers. You could have drivers from 18 to 70. You're going to have multi-generational drivers. You're going to have gaps in knowledge, skills, and abilities that some may have, some may not. Some may be more, let's say, aggressive, but not in a bad way, more assertive than others. So you have to, from our standpoint, we address it very broadly. Like, hey, here are some tools, but now you have to understand your bus, your route, and your parents, your stops uh, to know how they fit in with your experiences and how you can use them effectively. So it's really about that pre-preparation to deal with it.
Dennis. Oh, was it sure? Chris, did you have a thought on that?
Yeah, totally on board with what Joe just said. That's my standard bus joke, by the way. I'm on board with Joe. Doesn't get any better.
Oh man, we need the people. I can see the laughter and the
we
participants.
we don't get called back for many trainings. But that again, the one of the things that we focus on heavily in our de-escalation training is relationship building. And like Joe said, this has got to happen beforehand. We have to be prepared to respond, but you can't wait for it. So when we do training with transportation, with drivers and whatnot, one of the questions we'll just ask them, how do you learn kids' names? How do you learn your students' names? Make that your number one priority. Names have so much power in even, I mean, I was looking at research recently, even in comatose states, right? The brain will respond to names, right? Using the person's name. So that has so much power. And regardless of where they are, like Joe said, drivers span the spectrum, right? But anybody can learn someone else's name and greeting them. Dennis, it's good to see you this morning. Good morning. Hey, Joe, how you doing? All right, it's good to see you. That just right there is the first step and goes a long way. So relationship building, specifically starting with just simple things like that.
And what's interesting, Chris, is over the course of the last several years, the conversation shifted from responding to prevention, and that is very encouraging to see, because I mean that's the ultimate goal is to get ahead of situations, diffuse situations before they do escalate, and it's just we think about that in the classroom, in the school building, but it's really the same thing whether you're on your mobile classroom or otherwise. So that's absolutely critical. I'm glad that we're taking the conversation down that direction. Dennis, again, let me ask you a question. So as far as transportation safety, I mean, of course, not North Penn, but in other districts, why is that overlooked? Why is safety and security, and we'll talk about the difference between safety and security in a moment here, but why is that often overlooked? And how do you prioritize that in your district?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say necessarily that's overlooked. I think it may be, trying to look at things as a whole from like the building to the bus. And, what we've done is basically as, conversations with our building administrators, building a relationship with the bus drivers, on what to do day to day, because the building administrators know their students in their specific situations too, and making that, the bus is an extension of the classroom. Your bus is a classroom on wheels, and kind of, putting that as like our standard across the board, that, your expectation on the bus is to act as if you were in the classroom as well, so that those same standards are in place, as a district, for us. And, we're continuing to, improve and work on that to make that the standard across the board, because a lot of people, don't necessarily see, transportation as like a necessity all the time, but it is. We need bus drivers, and we need to get the kids to school. The first people that the kids see at the beginning of the day, and they're last at the end of the day. So I think, having that open communication with, drivers to building administrators to the transportation department, and constantly moving that across the board, I think that's extremely important, especially in establishing those relationships with students. Like Joe had said, that relationship, from driver to student, and what Chris had said about just knowing your name. What do you do to know a child's name? I think that's crucial, because it gives that personal effect when a driver's sitting in a seat and they say, "Hey, Joe, can you please sit down? We discussed this in the past." Things like that. I think they go a long way, to make that bus ride a lot easier for a driver. So it's not always cut and dry like that, but we as we said, is we want to make sure we provide the tools to our drivers to succeed in as many situations as possible. And there are very specific situations, but making sure to prepare, not paranoid, as Joe has said. I think that's a great phrase, to go by, making sure people are prepared for that. So
No, thanks. That's Joe. I think you had a comment.
Yeah, and what Dennis said, and Chris, those building of relationships. What's the longstanding joke in real estate? What are the only three things that matter in real estate? Location, 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 right? Well, the same thing applies in business, but it's communication, communication, communication. And if our bus drivers aren't talking to, in our case, our customers, our districts, but wherever you find yourself, if your bus drivers aren't talking to your teachers and your administrators, and your administrators and teachers aren't talking to the bus drivers, and everybody's sharing that information to prepare everybody, because we've had incidents where there are issues at school, and then no one says, "Hey, bus driver, these two kids that had an issue at school just happened to ride the same bus home." And now that driver's unprepared for what may or may not happen, right? So the communication thing is key. I think, when you asked about safety and security, but it could be safety, security, real estate, facilities, IT, you name the business partner. If everybody's working in tandem and collaborating, the message gets across, and the people that need to know.
No doubt. Chris.
Man, I want to jump to one of the questions in the chat, if it's okay, that relates to this. I think that all of this stuff is so on point. Kevin asked a question about, does training include drivers involved in reporting change of behavior of their students, right? And Joe just nailed it, right? Communication, communication, communication. You show me any school safety crisis, shooting, or anything that's happened in the last 30 years, and I will show you a communication, kerfuffle, to put it politely, right? That's what we need to work on and focus on, and it's that pre-communication, not during a crisis, but before that happens, right? So Kevin's question about, does that happen? Do we recognize that? Do we report that? Do we have a way to report that? Do we even care? Just tell somebody, right? If you notice that change in behavior, that's critical, and that's a key component. We had a training a number of years ago, and if anybody related to that is out there in Zoom land, hope I get this right, and apologies if I don't, but there was a shooting we had here in Washington, and student brought their firearms in a golf bag. And we had the driver who transported that student to school in our training. And we got to this part where we were talking about change in behavior. And she shared her story tearfully, right? It had not been too many years since this incident had happened. And she said, it wasn't golf season. And I knew this kid and I knew his name and I had a kind of a relationship with him, and he brought his golf bag on the bus. And I remember thinking, that's strange. And no blame, no disrespect to her whatsoever. Nothing really stood out. It was kind of an odd kid, and he brought his golf bag, and she had no idea, right? But it's that kind of opportunity that we have if we stoke those fires of that behavior and reward it and encourage it, and we bring that up to the front and say, okay, yeah, say something, mention it, if to the kid or to anybody else up the line. That's spot on, that communication.
No, exactly. And Chris, yeah, I was going to jump on that question as well from Dr. Eberly, because that's important, about reporting changes of behavior of students. Awareness is so critical. One of our participants, Guy Blissner, I saw you on there earlier. Guy, always talks about the teacher's superpower, right? But the bus driver's superpower. You see these kids every single day. Has the behavior changed? Has their behavior changed outside at the bus stop? Those are things that, in one of the themes that has also really evolved over the last year or so, is that safety and security is everyone's responsibility. Everyone has a stake in this. It's not just the superintendent, not just the principal, or the director of safety and security for a school or school district. It's everyone's responsibility. And that's why focusing on prevention and is absolutely critical. I'm glad that this conversation is going in that direction. Joe, you kind of touched upon it. I brought it up briefly, but what is when we talk about safety and security, they're used intertwinably or interchangeably. I think I made that word up. But how would you characterize the safety and security in transportation from your perspective?
And don't worry, I make words up every single day. So I totally knew exactly what you meant with intertwined. 100% spot on. We work with our safety department very closely. And this is the easiest way I've ever put it. And Jonathan and I actually had a conversation last week about it. But I kind of look at it as you have the safety side, which I think of fire and EMS. Then you have the security side that is law enforcement. Now, we're not enforcing laws. We're looking at it from a risk management standpoint. But those two working together, there are scenarios where both are on scene at the same time. But because of the nature of the event, fire might be in charge or police might be in charge. And you just look at it like that. But back to, if you're not communicating and you're not collaborating on it and making sure everybody's on the same page, it's very difficult to get to where you want to go. And I think driving a bus or transportation in general gives us the best analogy for how all that works. And it's going down the highway. You're maintaining your lane, but you're free to change lanes. You just have to tell people you're doing it, right? And you have to go with traffic and you can't leave people behind. And it's the analogy of driving and the safety precautions, the security precautions, everything around that just fits perfectly in our world in school bus transportation.
Yeah, no doubt. No, and along those lines, and Dennis, I know we had a roundtable last week, and we started talking about technology. What role does technology play in security, safety on buses? Because you had a lot of great insights on that.
Yeah, I mean, we've been implementing a lot of kind of what we think will eventually become industry standard across the board on buses. We have technology where, just bus stop safety, where, automatic, camera enforcement, where a driver goes past the school bus's red lights. There's automatic enforcement on it. I know that was an issue when I was first driving. It was almost impossible to catch somebody that was running a a bus driver's red lights. You had to somehow catch the identity of the vehicle, the license plate, the identity of the driver before it would go anywhere. So now that that kind of technology is available to everybody, I think that's a huge help. And it kind of puts the drivers at ease too, knowing that's available to avoid, any incidents happening on the road. But also utilizing that technology on the inside of the bus as well, where you have cameras that are able to kind of 360 degree views of what's going on inside the bus, so that if there is something happening, a building administrator can see exactly what is happening, rather than the old style cameras, which would just kind of give you a back view of the bus, and kind of you're not really able to see what's going on back there. That's definitely helpful as well. And then also, we've been using technology that's a benefit to the parents as well, where they're able to see where the bus is at all times when the bus is on its way. That never really was available. I know parents, give their kids cell phones, and they might have Life 360 or an AirTag or something like that to be able to track their kids. But, just as a district, being able to provide that type of benefit to parents, where they could see and have the reassurance that their child is, home safely. Because, most families these days, everybody's working in the household. So, a lot of the kids are getting off the bus themselves. So they want that reassurance that their child is home safely. And I get that. So in just kind of looking at the ever evolving technology that's becoming available on school buses, so we're looking to see, what we're always open to see what could potentially help as a benefit, for safety's sake, basically, because that's what we're here for at the end of the day. Is we want to make sure we're doing what's safe for the children, and if it's going to provide us a benefit, then we're going to look at it.
No, awesome, Dennis, and Chris and Joe. I'm going to ask both of you about technology, because ZeroNow, we believe that it's about people, right? It's all about people, but technology are the tools for people to be more effective and more efficient and everything that they do. So Joe, let me ask you. I mean, what technologies are you seeing that augment a human's ability to be more effective and efficient when it comes to keeping students safe on the bus?
So, the technology, the cameras, everything's a tool, right? You said it, Art. It's a tool that the people have to interpret and use effectively. If no one's watching the camera's just recording, and we get to watch the unfortunate aftermath after the fact, and there's nothing we can do. But making sure that when we roll that technology out, and I do a lot of quoting. If anybody remembers the 29th Commandant of the Marine Corps, General Alfred Gray, there's a paper on him called Grayisms, and it's just things he loves to say or used to say on a routine basis. And one of them, actually the first one in the paper, is, "What do you want it to look like?"
Oh
You're
no,
strategic. Am I frozen?
you're back.
All
You're
right,
back.
all right. So if you heard me about the commandant saying, what do you want it to look like at the end of the day? When we think about technology, we want to think strategically. What do we want this technology to do for us in the long term? Yes, there may be some short-term benefits, but we want to see what it looks like down the road from a technology standpoint. So we always want to pay attention to that, but also the back end. And I think Dennis said, about tracking our kids, right? We do that as parents. I know I do. My mom didn't have a clue where I was in the 80s, but we do. But when we offer that to parents, it also opens up bad actors, aggravated parents, to know exactly where that bus is. So if they want to confront it, they know where it's at. So putting precautions up front and having discussions around how to use that technology on the end user side, I think, is also important.
Chris, please.
Joe, actually, your mom just called and she was asking if I knew where you were too. So I don't know what to say. So
Is that what that call was? Oh, okay, man.
yeah, sorry. So I was off mic for just a second there, but yeah, I will answer your question in the way it was intended. I think bus cameras, I think on on the bus, cameras, internal cameras, et cetera. I think they're great. We had an incident in our region recently with a car tagged a bus, bumped into it, and the driver wasn't even sure. I saw the transportation director from that district was in the chat there, so I may get the details wrong, but the I think a student told the bus driver, "I think we just got hit," and so there were cameras that were accessed external to the bus. In our community, we had some of those cameras police have access to, so they were able to pull that up and track that down. So I think the forensics part of it, aftermath, analyzing things afterwards, and I think that's a great deterrent too. The more stories get out there like that, oh my goodness, they have cameras, they have things right that they can use to track. I think one of our districts now has just installed some of the tracking software for students, right? Scan in, scan out, those kinds of things. And they've had a lot of success with that, just knowing. But so that's my in the spirit of your question answer. But I have to get back to what we focus on, like ZeroNow, right? This is the best piece of technology that we can equip people with to remind them. And again, no disrespect to anything that you guys have mentioned. They're all great technologies, but training people to use their God-given intelligence, right, and their observation, and make critical decisions and act on them, right? Joe, love the quote. Here's one that we use a lot. Teddy Roosevelt. The best thing you can do is the right thing. The next best thing you can do is the wrong thing, because the worst thing you can do is, nothing, right? And just super quick story. One of our districts a couple of years ago had an incident with a gun on the bus, and the video of that is so compelling. I love watching this video of it because it's the rear camera in the bus, and it has the perspective, right? And you can so clearly see these two students sitting next to each other, and one continues to look in his backpack, and he's doing this weapons check because he's brought a 9mm and he's got it in his backpack. And the student sitting next to him notices that. And it's the student who eventually takes the initiative to peek over and sees that it's a handgun. And he reaches down and grabs the bag and shuts that backpack and starts shouting, "Bus driver, bus driver, bus driver, I need you, I need you." And to watch that play out in that video is so powerful, because the driver does just what he should do. He comes back and takes control of the situation, secures the firearm, they evacuate the bus. I mean, it's awesome, but it's the student who started that process using his best piece of technology.
Exactly. Somebody posted, see something, say something, right? And that's, going back to the whole point of it's safety and security is everyone's responsibility, and knowing and feeling empowered, and that's key too. It's just the knowledge, like you said, Chris. It is, it's what's up there. You're working off the quote that you shared. One of the things that we're trying to combat against through education is the just do something, and which is typically misguided. It's like we'll buy more of this, or we'll do something, and having an informed perspective. And that's why we created that path to safer schools, to provide that guidance. Start with a safety team, understand your vulnerabilities, how are you going to fund your programs, prevention. And our goal is, I think everyone's goal here is to end at prevention. Like if the path ended at prevention, we'll be in great shape, and we'll disband ZeroNow. But it's important to have informed decisions. And so, you sharing your experiences here is absolutely critical. We already started to get some questions, and if you have questions, hit the Q&A button. We're well halfway past the program. So if you have questions for our panelists, just type it in the Q&A. We're going to take a couple questions from the registrants because we had so many that came in here. Let's see here. Chris, we talked about this earlier, how you're dealing with increase in stop arm violations. One of you mentioned that it's only required in a few states, or what is the deal with stop arm violations? And is that a factor that you experience in Washington?
I think that was Joe who mentioned that.
Joe.
I'm going to kick
Yeah.
that one back over to Joe.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to hear Chris's take on it, but what we were talking about earlier is, stop arm violations, just like any law, right? It, there's only laws on the books in 27 states that actually allow enforcement of the stop arm violation as it's recorded. Of course, if it's visually verified by a police officer on scene, any state. But making sure that we advocate that that's a 50 state law to be effective. And I think you all, if you travel down the road at any time, there's laws against cell phone usage. How many people are on their cell phone when you drive past them? There's laws against speeding. How many times you get past, so having the law is great, but it's the enforcement part, or having the technology to detect it's great, but it's the enforcement part behind it, the accountability to bring to weight or bear on the offender that actually makes the point. But then again, when we're talking about laws, the criminal always gets to vote. So regardless of what we do, the criminal always gets to say whether I'm going to obey or not. So it's just, back to that being prepared, situationally aware, making sure you're prepared for those types of situations when you're doing a stop.
So, Chris, please go ahead.
I just wanted to tag on one thing, Joe. Amen to that. And the other thing I would add, this may come as a surprise to some of our attendees, but legislation that is passed, our laws are not always the most on point or informed. And we've participated in and been advisors on a couple here in Washington State, and it's still, God bless them, we got to have laws, but whatever you can do to advocate to get your voice heard. I know that ZeroNow does a great job of that, and other agencies and organizations like NCSSD lobby for those kinds of things to get heard, because sometimes it's just a waste of everybody's time to sort this out. I saw there was a question in the chat about signage and bus intruders and that kind of thing. And we've got a situation here in Washington where the law was passed because of an incident that we had with a fatality for a driver. Well, we have to put signs up to make sure that people know that they can't come on the buses. Okay, but then the buses and the transportation director said, yeah, but you have another law that says we can't put any signs up. So what do we do? And we're still sorting through that. That was a year ago. So get involved.
Yeah, and Chris, I'll tell you, as a former elected official on the local level, I had very limited expertise in public works, how sewage systems work, and so that's where lawmakers on a state, national, local level are faced with school safety policies, and often they're influenced by different organizations or specific with specific interests. And to that point, ZeroNow is actually releasing model legislation, which really is designed to provide that big picture guidance for any sort of state or national policies, laws, funding programs for safety and security. Because, like I said, if you don't have expertise, and we don't expect them to have expertise in this, so keep an eye out for that. So that's very good, very important point. But glad that you brought that up. A couple more questions here from our participants. So Rebecca asks from Clark County School District. So this goes back to the training thing, I would imagine. So if whoever wants to take this one, what are practical strategies for individual students posing safety concerns or threats? So if there is a student that you have concerns with, what strategies would you recommend or employ to mitigate that and prevent something from happening? And Dennis, we'll let you get started.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to that communication piece and, establishing those relationships with the school building administrators, whether it's the special ed department, the principal, and so on, and providing those training resources of what to do with that specific student in said situation, because, they know what that student does every day, and when they're in the classroom, so they want to relay that information to the bus driver or even the bus assistant that's on the bus of what to do in said situation. So that open communication, it's crucial. You have to have that relationship with the schools, and we emphasize to our bus drivers of how important it is to just have a conversation with the schools about situations that you're going through, so that they can help support them in those situations. So in those trainings and such as like de-escalation techniques and how to manage student behaviors, utilizing technologies that are out there to help that open communication process fall through. So that's what I go back to always, is that communication piece. That's crucial.
Awesome. Chris.
So I would add the same advice that I did with the students, getting to know your students. One of the things that we cover in our transportation crisis training is how to build relationships with the rest of the people in your district. So not only learn the names of your students, learn the names of the principals, learn the names of the assistant principals, learn the names of people in the building, counselors, and that sort of thing, so that you can take those steps that Dennis described, right? Tangible, hands-on. Okay, I've got this student. I don't know what to do about it, but I'm going to do something. What do I do? Well, I know some of the office staff because I walked in there and learned their names. Okay, so I'm going to go talk to Susie and say, hey, I've noticed this. What do I do with it? So taking that practical step is one of the big things that we talk about in building transportation crisis plans is connections. Get on the crisis team if your school has one. Get involved at the district level with your transportation director or whomever, right? But make those connections, build those relationships internally too, so that you have some place to go when you have that information to make it actionable.
Relationships. What a novel concept, Chris. Joe, you had some thoughts on that. Mind blowing. It is. Joe. Oh, he froze.
I'm going to take it one step in a different direction. And this is all because of a topic Mary raised yesterday during our pre-call. But getting to know those people, absolutely building those relationships. We want to make sure that relationship building works in the opposite direction, though. Know your bus driver. Bring them into the mix. They are the ones that are going to know those students. They are the ones that are going to talk to them every day. I think Mary said her mother-in-law is a bus driver yesterday on our call. And she's like, if you want to know what kid is, malnutrition, you ask. If you want to know what kid is coming from a home that is having some struggles, ask the bus driver. So I think bringing them into that mix, and that does two things. That gets them involved and gives them ownership over their role. And if you give somebody ownership, they start to take it. But it also builds that relationship and allows for a different type of take on whatever you're assessing. It could be a threat, it could be bad behavior, whatever it is. But that all starts with that culture you build internally when everyone is included.
Exactly. It's all about the culture, right? That your DNA as an organization, building in safety into that culture. And once again, how much does that cost? $0, right? It's a priceless. It is absolutely priceless. It's something that we can start doing every single day, and that's critical. On that note, and I suppose one more point on that. What's interesting, like just the concept of relationships, in a day where we're more connected superficially with social media, it's the real human interactions. I know SROs are trained in building relationships with students and the next generation of law enforcement. It's all about building relationships, being part of the community, not showing up only when things bad happen. So, Dennis, we talked about this before, but building on the relationship side of things, like what are some things that transportation teams like yours at North Penn can do, or how do you work more closely with administrators, law enforcement, and parents to improve safety? Do you collaborate with those folks? I know you've got a really tough school board and superintendent. It's really difficult to work with now.
I mean, it goes back to that open communication and just having those conversations across the board, because, we have our schools, they'll have like monthly meetings with our bus drivers to discuss what issues are you going through and what can we do to help you in said issues, and then maybe everything's good. But there are times where there are issues, and I think that open communication is paramount to resolve those issues. And we have monthly safety meetings with our drivers. We also hold public forum where we're having as we go over safety and security, and allow people to interject their comments on public safety issues that are within the school district. So I think just keeping that open communication across the board with the community, law enforcement, your employees. That's what you need to do, because we're all involved with it at the end of the day, and we're all looking for what's going to be the most safe way to go about things. And I think that communication piece really ties into making it work.
Common theme here. I take a couple more questions from some of the attendees, and then we'll move on to get your final thoughts here. So Natasha Bennett asks from Colorado, and anyone can jump in on this one. But so why do so many kids go missing on the first week of school? How do you deal with the missing student situation? Has that ever happened to either one of you? Never, not in Washington, Chris. Everything is nope. That's good. That's a good thing. Okay, Joe. I mean, you've got a national coverage, so you've had to have had this happen at least once.
And I apologize. I was actually looking at a question in the chat. Say that one more time.
Why are so many kids go missing the first week of school? And have you ever had a student go missing? And how did that situation end up?
So I think when you look at that, it comes down.
Okay.
You look at the first week of school, it's everyone's still learning routes. Everybody's still learning kids. Everybody's still learning stops. So it just goes back to that.
Got it. No, Joe, yes, never missing, misplaced. Dennis, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I mean, to Joe's point about like the first week of school, drivers getting familiar with the routes and getting familiar with the students they have, just double, triple checking before they're leaving the school to make sure, that the school is, putting everybody onto the bus that should be on that bus, and making sure that the kindergartners are sitting up front, things like that, putting those kind of pieces in place to make sure that when the bus driver is going to drop that child off, they're dropping that child off where they're supposed to be, and they're dropping off with the parent or so on. I think just taking the extra minute or so, I think that's very helpful. And granted, there's always going to be one that falls through the cracks, and a student winds up getting onto the wrong bus because they may, for example, we had something happen this year where one student was rostered to one bus that goes to the same school, and then this year, because of having to make sure that we have enough capacity on the bus, those children had to go on to a different bus at the same school. So, the child thinking that, oh, I'm still on this bus from last year, they're not, they're on this new bus. So kind of putting those things into place to make sure, everybody's going where they're supposed to be going. And then, it goes back to that communication piece and establishing the relationships with the schools, about what processes are you putting in place to make sure you can prevent anything like that from happening? So is it that you're bringing all the kindergartners out first, and then first, second, third, fourth, and so on, to make sure that, everything is structured from school to, getting the child home. That's crucial.
No, thank you, Dennis. Chris.
One addition I'd make to that, first of all, thanks, Joe, from the chat. Joe's one of my transportation mentors, training and whatnot, and just experience. So never missing, misplaced. Yeah. And to tag on to Dennis's point, the vast majority, 99% of the time, it's going to be just all the moving pieces and parts, and the kids and littles and olders, and oh, I'm going to catch a ride home with so and so, right? And it's 99% of the time it's going to be nothing. But I think my guidance on that would be focus on the 1%. and just assume everything is going to be in that 1% of something's wrong. In Joe's district, I see chatter, communication when a kid isn't where they're supposed to be, when they're misplaced, everything gets stopped. Everything, all communication is lit up, transportation, dispatch, schools, all hands on deck. And again, 99% of the time, it's fine. It's just a miscommunication. But that 1% is what we want to think about. That's where we want to live.
All right, we're running out of time, but I do have another question here. This Ernestine Walker asked this question in the chat, but I also want to piggyback on this. And I just want to remind folks, we're not going to get through all the questions that came in online beforehand. So if you go to the ncssd.org, we have all of our ZeroNow programs are posted in there, so you could continue the conversation there. So Ernestine asks, so what if a student misbehavior is noticed first on the bus and not in the classroom first? And the way that I would kind of phrase this, pardon me if I do this, Ernestine, but what mechanism is there to report a concern from the school bus to the school, to the district? I know Guy Blissner, who's on here, talks about in some of the schools in Idaho, they have like a Google form that they pull up so a teacher could quickly, because it needs to be frictionless, right? So you could quickly get that information in there and potentially connect the dots, because this student may have an issue in class and might need some help. Dennis, would you mind taking that one?
Yeah, I mean, we actually just established utilizing an electronic reporting system for our drivers that goes directly to the building administrator to report behaviors that are happening on the bus, because it is a possibility that they're not seeing those behaviors in the school. So again, it goes back to the open communication piece of from the driver to the school to the driver to the transportation department, and just keeping everybody in the loop. So we're utilizing that system, and it gives the feedback, as to what was done in that said situation. So if driver is reporting, Johnny was doing this on the bus, the with the system, it'll give the feedback to the driver as to what action was taken, with that. And then that might provoke a conversation from the building administrator to the driver to say, hey, I saw what you reported. Let's talk about what you reported. They may look at video, but also give the driver's experience as to what happened as well. So it goes back to the the open communication relationships between the schools and the drivers, and using those tools that are in place to streamline that.
Communication, once again, and streamlining that is absolutely key. And once again, that's where technology can work as a tool, right, to help facilitate that. If there's an iPad or something that quickly send a message via your phone or whatever mechanism that would do it. So we're definitely we're running out of time here. But before we wrap it up, I would love for each of you just to provide some final thoughts, words of wisdom for our participants. Something to take away. And speaking of takeaways, we'll also, when we post the recording of this, we'll have some key takeaways as well for everyone, and some resources. So, Joe, if you wouldn't mind, final thoughts from you for our participants.
Absolutely. And I greatly appreciate the time today. I loved hearing all the perspectives and just looking at security in a strategic way, not necessarily a word on your shirt or a uniform, but a strategic, tactical thought process around security risk management.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Weedin, final thoughts, words of wisdom.
I'm not sure that we can use those in the same application here for me, but I do have some final thoughts. Again, thank you for doing this. This is exactly where we need to be. There was a comment earlier in the chat where someone observed, "Wow, I see a lot of drivers on this." That's great. Good for you guys for getting drivers involved in this process. One of the trainings that we do annually is something that individuals in our state educational service districts started because there was really no formal training for transportation directors. And so they started this independent 4-year program where they bring in students and folks, put them in cohorts and they advance, right? And it's that kind of thinking. Hey, we don't have this, but we need it. Let's do it. Let's just start this and get the information out there and get that. We can't wait. Communication is obviously communication and relationship building. We talked about that's essential, but we can't wait for a program or a technology or a spark. We have to just do it ourselves. And it's that easy as just walking into the office and saying, hi, what's your name? So thank you to all the transportation directors who are on today. And especially, again, kudos and thank you to the drivers, dispatchers, ride-along folks who are involved today. Also, that's the first step in a much needed journey. So thank you.
Thank you, Chris. No, that's great insights. Mind blown, of course. Now, Dennis, final thoughts for our participants.
Yeah, I'll piggyback kind of on Chris, what he's saying. A big thank you to all of our drivers, transportation directors, basically anybody that's in this industry, that's striving to, look at the ultimate goal here, that's safety, at the end of the day. And, we're doing everything we can to, achieve that goal, because there are situations that are difficult, but I think the pillars to success in this industry, is safety, training, that communication, and establishing those relationships. That's what makes this thing go, at the end of the day. And that's what we want to do is, kind of go by those pillars to, make sure that our operation runs as it needs to. And at the end of the day, safety is our ultimate goal, and making sure that a child gets to school safely, gets home safely, and then utilizing whatever tools may be out there in terms of leveraging technology possibly is helpful, but also going back to that training piece of, making sure your drivers are prepared, not paranoid in said situation. So again, thank you, everybody. Appreciate the time.
Thank you, Dennis and Chris and Joe. Yeah, the three big things that I took away from this, being a layperson, is number one, relationships are critical. It's all about relationships. Number two, communications, right? And number three, training. So you feel you're prepared. You know how to pre-escalate a situation. You know how to confront situations and deal with situations with confidence. So those are really the key things that I take away. We are over time now, but just want to remind folks, our next conversation is on October 21st at 2 p.m. And we will be discussing sporting and special events and Friday Night Lights. We're getting ready to get back to that. Just want to talk about planning for that. I just want to thank Access Communications once again for sponsoring this webinar. And we will post it. Somebody asked, when will this be available? It'll be available by next Tuesday. We'll post it in the NCSSD community. It will also be on the ZeroNow website as well as LinkedIn. So this will be available. And look for the Zero In white paper, insights paper, that will capture the discussion we had today, along with our roundtables with school safety directors and superintendents and school administrators to provide some insights. So once again, thank you, Joe. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Dennis. We'll see you all soon. Be safe. Take care.